Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. The doctor is in. I realize it's been a while since I've put up a new video. However, I've been busy writing and editing, trying to get my next project out. It's coming out on Friday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. You can see it on the screen. It's called A Bride for the Bee King. I'll read the back cover copy for you. Harc the Warpiper thinks he's only going to the court of the Bee King to inspect the ruler's troops. Then the Bee King tells him the real reason he requested the Warpiper is to help him choose a bride from the 4 bee queens. The Bee King is subject to the queen's pheromones and cannot trust himself to make a decision, but the Warpiper is an outsider and is unaffected by their pheromones. Harc must choose which of the 4 queens is the best fit for the king he has just met, without any understanding of the Thophalanthes, that's the beefolk. Will it be the cold and imperious Snow Queen, the hot-headed Fire Queen, the pragmatic and humble Earth Queen, or the high-minded Air Queen? While trying to discharge this duty, the Warpiper also hopes to instill some humility and selflessness into the Bee King. I realize this is a Valentine's Day release, and of course, given the sword and sorcery fantasy leaning of the Warpiper universe, you can be quite certain that mayhem, hijinks, and slaughter will follow in great measure. I thought, since I'm just a few days out from the release, that I would read Chapter 1. It's a very short chapter, so it won't take me very long. A Bride for the Bee King by G. Doc Swift, a Warpiper novella. Chapter 1. A Soldier's Lot. Harc cursed the uneven terrain as his ankle rolled. It was not the first time for either occurrence. He paused and stared up the slope. Bad enough to be in the land of monsters with threats everywhere. Even the very land seems hostile, he thought. Bad enough to be serving the dragon to repay my debt. Worse to be loaned out to others. But Harc was a soldier. He grew accustomed long ago to having his decisions made for him. All his life had been spent pursuing the goal of becoming a Warpiper, the kingdom's legendary elite defenders who bore magical musical instruments into combat, and for 5 years he was counted amongst that august company. And now the Warpipers are no more, destroyed for a king's avarice, all gone save for me. Harc sighed. Should I train my son Brehane as the first of a new generation? Harc did not know. What he did know was that his internal debate was merely wasting time. The reputation of the Warpipers extended far beyond the borders of human lands. When the Bee King learned that a Warpiper served the dragon, he purchased Harc's service to inspect the king's troops. Harc had never even heard of the beefolk. The word Thophalanth was completely unknown to him before the dragon uttered it. More surprising than learning of a new sort of man was the fact that their realm lay within the land of monsters. They must have been cut off behind the borders, established in the Gods' War, Harc guessed. The day-face began to pass behind the summit of the peak he was halfway up. Harc took out the map the dragon had drawn. It was all but useless, showing only the dragon's home mountain and Floraval, the home of the beefolk, joined by a meandering line. Neither intervening terrain nor distance were indicated. Harc had no idea where he was. He simply continued onward. That was another legacy of soldiering. He could march for hours uncounted, but without the shared suffering of his comrades, Harc found exhaustion harder to dismiss. A high-pitched shriek sounded from beyond the summit. Harc's senses went on alert. The sound was unfamiliar, which made it a perfect match for the surroundings. His pack weighed heavily on his back, but when a large shadow passed over, he found renewed vigor. Several more shadows followed the first. Winged forms, black against the setting day face, darted down the slope toward him. Harc's eyes widened. Before he could blink, the flying forms grew large and were upon him. A slim form with iridescent wings flashing in the waning sun passed by so close that Harc's hair blasted backward from the wind. The trailing forms were considerably larger than the first. Their wings were not translucent and insectile, but feathered and avian, and gigantic. Those wings propelled a great eagle's head forward. It was from this head that the shriek originated, Harc learned, as the beak opened and the same call blasted out as it closed on him. The wings flared, bringing the eagle's body upright as its taloned feet stretched out for the Warpiper. Behind the body was not the expected feathered tail, but the body and tail of a great cat. The other pursuers shared the merged forms of cat and bird. While the lead monster slowed and redirected its attention to Harc, the others parted and flew around them, continuing after their prey. Harc gaped as Eagle's talons streaked closer. And that is the end of Chapter 1. That's the introductory chapter for A Bride for the Bee King, starring Harc the Warpiper. This novella is set not very long after the events of the novel The Last Warpiper, which came out in September of last year. You can still get this on Amazon, of course, both for Kindle and in print. A Bride for the Bee King, as I mentioned, comes out on Friday, February 14th, 2020. I hope you'll check it out. The ebook is only 99 cents. I've written this and priced it as an introductory for the Warpiper setting. There are, of course, Warpiper stories in my first book, Cats of War, which is a fiction collection, and it's also in my... There was also a story in Frogs of War. So basically everything I've published so far has at least one Warpiper story in it. I hope you'll give everything a check. I'm quite proud of this novella. It's about 25,000 words, so that's a pretty good deal for 99 cents. I like it. I think it's a good introduction to this unique fantasy world that I've created. This story has griffins, it has antlions, it has bee wolves, it has the beefolk themselves, and of course Harc the Warpiper with his flame-throwing bagpipes. I hope you'll give it a check, and I thank you very much for your time. The Doctor is out.